the question that we have on the table, and we're going down the row, and we're going to get to Maria, and then I'm going to come back to you because this is a question and answer session. I've just asked what percentage more, if possible, if we could pin it down, how much more money do we need for our public schools here in Miami-Dade County in order to get them to the level we want them to be, not the best possible, but a level we think is an attainable level. Maria, down to you.
Honestly, I'm going to defer this to Superintendent Carvalho because I do not have a sense of multiple or what that number really should be. I think that I agree that we really have to decide as a state and as a community where we want to be and where we want to play and what is it going to take to get there. I think funding is definitely a very large part of that equation. I also think effectiveness of the funding is very important, and prioritization. In business and in our industries, particularly with the downturn, we've had to prioritize what's important. We've all had to do cuts. Clearly, public-private institutions are in the same way, and I think we've also realized that there was some waste that we have gotten rid of, and maybe now we're too lean. I know I certainly am, but you know, something good has come of this, and that's been that we've been able to cut the waste and have higher effective and efficiency for the spend. But I think that still needs to be a part of the equation. It's not just more and more and more money. We need to also determine the use of that money.
Dr. Carvalho, before you answer, let me just give you a prelude to what's been said here about this issue. Everybody on the panel, I think, has agreed that business can step up and do more. Dr. Padron has said several times and forcefully that he thinks that business has not worked with our legislative delegation or our lawmakers in general. He didn't say legislative. He said lawmakers in general in a way to achieve a higher priority for education, which leads to higher funding. And so we're talking in the context of what do we need, because before we advocate for something, it would be nice to know what we're advocating for. And Dr. Padron said, you may have heard him just before you came in, saying he wants to make sure that we're not 49th or 50th in rankings and that we set some priorities. And with that, I leave it to you.
Well, thank you very much. And once again, thank you for the invitation. I apologize for the late arrival, but just wrapping up a school board meeting. You remember the days when the board meetings used to go on until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. Actually, the superintendent's agenda, I prepared the agenda for the board. We wrap up our agenda within the first 2 hours of the meeting, and then it's the board members' agenda that goes on for quite a while, and certainly the right of people to speak. So getting right into the issue, let's start with the fundamental question. You know, are we getting enough, and what would be a reasonable amount? Well, let me come back at you and tell you, I would love to get to a point where I get, at the very least, 1/3 of the price of incarceration of an adult in Florida. How about that? 1/3 per year. 1/3. So we spend $36,000 a year incarcerating an adult in the state of Florida, $36,000 a year. The total funding per student that Miami-Dade gets this year is just at about $6,000. In fact, over the past, over the past 4 years, since 4 years ago to now, the total BSA increased by only 59 cents. And yes, 3 or 4 years ago, there were substantial increases in public education funding, but we have given all of those back at the same time that the local tax roll has imploded. So just think about $36,000 per year for incarceration, $6,000 per year to educate a kid. What is the magical number? Well, DC spends about $14,000 a year. New York City spends about $12,000 a year. Boston about $11,000 a year. We in the state of Florida are spending about $6,000. The biggest insult is that most of those dollars are coming from your pocketbooks locally. They are being generated locally. 2/3 of the support for public education right now, this year, is being provided for by the local taxpayers through property taxes. 1/3 from the state. The amazing thing is just 7 years ago was completely the reverse. 6 years ago, the state actually lived up to what the Constitution of the state of Florida mandates, that the paramount duty of the state of Florida is to provide a high-quality educational program to its citizens, to its students. And that responsibility is of the state, not of local government. So 7 years ago, 60% of the funding for public education was coming from Tallahassee, 30% or so locally, and less than 10% from the federal government. That has completely changed. And the amazing part is that when times were good, when we were still in the middle of the housing boom, for every $1 that folks picked up locally because of increased valuation of properties here, the state backed out its own money. When the bottom falls out, meaning the local economy, the state economy falters, property values are no longer what they used to be, the tax roll is significantly depreciated. Simultaneously, state revenues, primarily driven by sales taxes, are also down. So where do you go? Fundamentally, the funding formula for the state of Florida needs to change. It relies on two factors that we now know are volatile: the value of property and sales taxes. In what we understand is, by and large, a consumer-driven economy in the state of Florida, you can't rely on that. Otherwise, the per-pupil funding in the state will fluctuate much like an EKG will. Can't afford to do that. Going to the heart of the matter, what would be enough? How about this? Rather than me giving you a number, how about that the fact that over the past 14 months, not only have we done more with less, we've done better with less. We increased our reserves by 1,900%, from $4 million to close to $80 million, at the same time that we cut $450 million from our budget. We have the highest performance ever in terms of student achievement, with the highest ever number of A-rated schools. Our kids, when compared to their counterparts in other urban areas across the country, New York, Washington, D.C., LA, Chicago, they posted the higher scores on the NAEP exam. And that one actually makes more of an impact on me. Why? Because the FCAT measures performance of Miami-Dade kids against Broward, Palm Beach, Okaloosa County, as if we care what happens in Okaloosa County, Jackson, Flagler. When we expect our kids, as well as Eduardo expects our students, by the time they leave us, to actually have the skill set required to survive and do well on the global economic stage. So what difference does it make when we compare our students' performance to their counterparts across the state? I want to know how they compare to kids in other states and, quite frankly, the rest of the world. So the NAEP scores are important. So when we compare Hispanic student or Black student performance against their counterparts in other urban areas, in 4th and 8th grade, those are the only grades tested, our students come out #1 in the country. But you don't read that in terms of FCAT performance. Why? Because it compares our students to other counties. It does not disaggregate, does not ask the question, okay, what is the poverty level in Broward or Palm Beach before we compare performance? It does not ask the question, how many kids do you have with disabilities, with autism? It does not ask the question, how many of those arrived here 3 years ago and today have to take a test? When you put all of that together, our kids perform remarkably well. You want them to perform better? Yes, money is not altogether the answer. But the fact that we are at 6,000 and falling, the fact that we are 39th in the nation, 39th in the nation in terms of per pupil funding and falling, and we expect higher performance, where now we're asking more of teachers, is just not right. Ask more, but invest a little bit. Right now, our position in Tallahassee is very simple. I recognize the economic conditions. I'm not asking for 1 single cent. All I'm saying is don't take any more. Do not take any more. We will be able to survive. As you don't take more, build the bridge right now for all of us to survive past 11/12. Why 11/12? Obama's stimulus package sunsets then. We're right now living on borrowed time with loaned money from the federal government. And I don't see, recognizing everybody's going to run for office now this year, I don't see anybody building the bridge to overcome that chasm in 2011-12. And this is the year when the architects of the budget in Tallahassee should be designing salvation for 11-12. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in a position where the economy is just rebounding, property values will not be what they need to be, the economic stimulus monies will run out, and there is no answer for our kids. So what do I want? Take no more, not 1 single red cent. Begin to explore different ways of funding education in Florida They are more sustainable, more recurring, without fluctuation, and design formulas at the federal level that do not punish schools, reward excellent teaching, but also recognize the peculiarity of individual student populations like those here in Miami-Dade.
Let me ask a follow-up question. I want to go down the panel, but I'll start with Dr. Carvalho first. You're talking about a new funding formula. What would that funding formula, in your vision, look like, and how would you go about attaining it? If you want something different, let's talk about what it'll be and how do we attain it. And I'll go down the panel. You can be first. Dr. Carvalho.
Oh, me first?
Yeah, you get to be first. We're going to down that road.
Sure. Well, you know, I wouldn't exclude out altogether sales taxes as a main contributor, or property taxes. But we've now learned that those can be rather volatile. Let's begin by looking at the totality of the taxation system in the state of Florida. Look at the exemptions that right now are on the books. Look at other ways of funding education without necessarily taxing the people of Florida. Internet sells to people who consume and buy from outside of Florida, but from companies in our state. Just doing those three things alone could bring in, not according to Alberto Carvalho, according to Dominic Calabro, one of the most conservative voices in the state of Florida, the head of Tax Watch. Those three things alone would pump in hundreds of millions of dollars into the state's coffer. I know some people maintain also a pragmatic position regarding gambling. It's a reality. It's a reality. It's already happening all over us. Tax it adequately, but if you do go down that road, reward the counties where the disproportionate impact is actually being felt. South Florida being one. Provide funding mechanism. Again, as I said, looking at the exemptions that currently are on the books on services and other goods, looking at taxation of internet sales, not taxing those in the state of Florida that already pay 6 or 7% sales taxes, but those that buy from outside the state, and still including, yes, property taxes and general sales taxes. That could bring some additional stability back to a system that right now is highly volatile and very, very unstable.
Dr. Tuthill.
Well, I think the superintendent's done a nice job of covering the waterfront and shrewdly avoiding the income tax term, so we'll let that go. The only thing I would add, I'll take a slightly different twist, would be how we spend the money. And I mentioned this before, but I really think that we do this in exceptional ed, where we identify children's individual needs and we try to fund based on the exceptionality. I think it'd be wonderful if we did the same thing across the board. You know, customization is the future of public education. And technology is going to be driving customization, dual enrollment, charter schools, all these kind of things that are increasingly allowing us to customize to better meet individual children's needs. But the funding formula is oftentimes very hostile to that. And so I think we need a funding process that really allows us to fund individual needs. And like I said before, some kids may need to go to school 210 days a year, some kids may only need 100 days. But at the end of the day, the funding, how we fund the kids ought to be based on the child's needs. And I think that would go a long way to helping us deal with the effectiveness and efficiency issues.
Eduardo.
Well, I'll repeat the one that I mentioned before. I'll be very happy we're able to get back the district cost differential at the level that should be entitled to. That has caused significant damage to the school system. It has really impacted us at the college level, and it's a very unfair thing. And unfortunately, it was our own doing locally, and we need to regain that. And I don't know when we'll be able to do that, but it goes back to my original statement that that's the kind of thing, for example, if we were able to get the leadership of the business community here to just take that issue and make sure that we're able to change the formulas so the district cost differential will be instituted in a fair way. Because let me tell you, with what it costs the school system to hire a teacher here, they can hire 2 teachers in the Panhandle. And, you know, because of the difference in the cost of living and other factors here. So I would say that, you know, coming up with a formula that is fair and that provides us resources that are necessary is not just identifying new sources of revenue, which I believe is essential, but it's also reprioritizing and setting things in place that will make a big difference.